The shrill ring of the telephone pierced through our peaceful Sunday afternoon like a knife. I froze, wooden spoon suspended over the simmering pot of chili, my heart suddenly racing. Something in me knew this call would change everything. "Rebecca, honey, can you get that?" Ethan called from the living room, his voice muffled by the football game blaring on TV. I wiped my hands on my apron and rushed to answer. "Hello? Rebecca?" It was Clara, my mother-in-law, her voice tight with worry. "It's Benjamin. He's fallen and broken his hip. We're at the hospital now." My stomach dropped. "Oh no, is he okay? What happened?" As Clara filled me in on the details, I caught Ethan's eye. He must have sensed the tension in my voice because he muted the TV and came to stand beside me, his brow furrowed in concern. "What's going on?" he mouthed. I held up a finger, listening intently as Clara continued. "The doctors say he'll need surgery, and then, well, he can't live alone anymore. We need to figure something out." "Of course," I said, my mind already racing. "We'll be there as soon as we can. Which hospital?" After jotting down the details, I hung up and turned to Ethan. "It's your grandfather. He's broken his hip." Ethan's face fell. "Damn, is he okay?" I quickly relayed what Clara had told me. As I spoke, I could see the wheels turning in Ethan's head, probably already calculating how this would impact our lives. "We should go to the hospital," I said, already moving to turn off the stove. "Can you call your sister? I'll get the kids ready." Ethan nodded, reaching for his phone. "Yeah, I'll let Sarah know. She'll probably want to meet us there." Within 20 minutes, we were in the car, our 2 children, Emma and Jack, unusually quiet in the back seat. As we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives were about to change dramatically. At the hospital, we found Clara pacing in the waiting room, her normally perfectly coiffed hair disheveled. Sarah arrived moments after us, her husband Tom in tow. "How is he?" Ethan asked, embracing his mother. Clara sighed heavily. "They've taken him into surgery. The doctor said it went well, but—" She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. I stepped forward, putting a comforting hand on her arm. "But what, Clara? He can't go back to living alone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's going to need full-time care, at least for a while." The weight of her words settled over us like a heavy blanket. I glanced at Ethan, seeing the same realization dawning in his eyes. Our lives were about to become much more complicated. "We'll figure it out," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We're family. That's what we do." Sarah nodded in agreement, but I couldn't help noticing the flicker of unease that passed between her and Tom. I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the present moment. As we settled in to wait for news, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was just the beginning. Benjamin had always been a strong, independent man. How would he handle this sudden loss of freedom? And how would we, as a family, cope with the challenges ahead? Little did I know, as I sat there in that sterile hospital waiting room surrounded by my family, that this was only the first tremor in what would become an earthquake, shaking the very foundations of our lives. The real test was yet to come, and it would push us all to our limits, revealing truths about ourselves and each other that we never could have imagined. The crash of shattering glass jolted me from my sleep. I bolted upright, heart pounding, and fumbled for my robe. Ethan stirred beside me, mumbling groggily. "What was that?" "I'll check," I whispered, already padding down the hallway towards Benjamin's room. I found him standing amidst a sea of broken china, his face flushed with anger. "This blasted tea set," he bellowed. "It's completely useless." "Grandpa Ben," I said softly, trying to calm him. "What's wrong? Why are you up so late?" His eyes, sharp despite the hour, fixed on me. "I wanted tea, Rebecca. Is that a crime now? But this ridiculous china you insist on using, it's too delicate for a man's hands." I bit back a sigh. It was the china his late wife had cherished, but I didn't dare remind him of that now. "Let me clean this up, and I'll make you some tea in a sturdier mug, okay?" As I swept up the shards, Benjamin launched into a lecture. In my day, we knew how to make things that lasted, not like this flimsy modern junk. And while we're at it, your entire household could use an overhaul. The way you run things, it's all wrong. I gritted my teeth, reminding myself that his frustration wasn't really about the teacup. It had been 3 weeks since he'd moved in with us, and each day brought new challenges. The once stern but fair man I'd known had become a cantankerous shadow of himself, lashing out at everyone and everything. "I appreciate your input, Grandpa Ben," I said, forcing a smile. "How about we discuss some changes over breakfast tomorrow?" He harumphed, but seemed slightly. "Fine, but I expect you to listen, Rebecca. There's wisdom in these old bones, whether you young folks want to hear it or not." As I tucked him back into bed, I couldn't help but wonder if there really was some hidden wisdom beneath his harsh words. The rest of the family had grown increasingly impatient with his outbursts, but something told me to keep digging. The next morning, over a breakfast of sturdy mugs and Benjamin's favorite oatmeal, he began his critique. "Your children, Rebecca, they need more discipline. In my day, we knew how to raise respectful youngsters." I saw Ethan's jaw clench from across the table, but I placed a calming hand on his arm. "What do you suggest, Grandpa Ben?" For the next hour, Benjamin expounded on everything from our parenting style to our choice of curtains. Some of it was outdated, even offensive, but buried within the rants were nuggets of genuine insight. "You're too soft on them," he growled. "But at least you listen. Unlike some people." His eyes darted to Ethan, who was pointedly ignoring the conversation. As Benjamin continued, I noticed Clara hovering in the doorway, her expression a mix of exasperation and guilt. She caught my eye and quickly retreated, leaving me to wonder about the growing divide I sensed in the family. Later that afternoon, as I was folding laundry, Ethan cornered me in our bedroom. "How can you stand it?" he demanded. "He's impossible." I sighed, setting down a half-folded shirt. "He's struggling, Ethan. This isn't easy for him either." "But the way he talks to you, to all of us, it's not right, Rebecca." I met his gaze steadily. "There's more to it than that, if we just listen." Ethan threw up his hands. "Listen? To what? More complaints and insults? You're being naive, Rebecca. He's not going to change." As he stormed out, I felt a heaviness settle in my chest. The rift I'd sensed was widening, not just between Benjamin and the family, but between Ethan and me. That night, as I lay awake, Benjamin's words echoed in my mind. Beneath the harshness, I'd sensed a desperate need to be heard, to still feel valuable. While the others saw only the prickly exterior, I was beginning to glimpse the vulnerable man underneath. I made a silent vow then. I would keep trying to understand, to find the wisdom hidden in Benjamin's words. Even if it meant standing alone against the tide of family frustration, I wouldn't give up on him. Little did I know, this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would change all our lives forever. I never meant to eavesdrop, but the hushed voices drifting from the kitchen stopped me in my tracks. Clara's unmistakable laugh, tinged with a hint of bitterness, made me pause outside the door. I swear, if I have to listen to Dad complain one more time about how we don't do things the right way, I might just wish him away myself. My breath caught in my throat. I knew Benjamin had been difficult, but to hear Clara speak so callously about her own father. Then came the sound that truly broke my heart, Ethan's deep chuckle joining his mother's laughter. "Maybe we could accidentally book him on a one-way cruise," Ethan joked. "Think he'd notice if we didn't pick him up at the port?" I couldn't bear to hear any more. I burst into the kitchen, my face flushed with anger and disappointment. "How can you two talk like that?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Clara and Ethan jumped, guilt flashing across their faces before quickly morphing into defensive irritation. "Oh, Rebecca," Clara sighed, rolling her eyes. "We were just letting off some steam. You know how Dad can be." I turned to Ethan, hoping to see some remorse in his eyes, but found only annoyance. "It was just a joke, Becca. Lighten up." "A joke?" I repeated, incredulous. "Your grandfather is struggling, Ethan. He needs our support, not this." Ethan's jaw clenched. "You don't get it, do you? He's making everyone miserable. The kids are walking on eggshells. I can barely stand to be in my own home, and you're just enabling him." "Enabling?" I shot back. "I'm trying to understand him, to help him adjust. He's family, Ethan. We can't just wish him away because it's inconvenient." Clara stepped between us, her hands raised placatingly. Now, let's not fight. Rebecca, dear, I know you mean well, but you have to admit Dad's behavior is wearing on all of us." I shook my head, feeling suddenly very alone. "I can't believe what I'm hearing. He raised you, Clara. And Ethan, he's your grandfather. How can you be so callous?" Ethan's eyes flashed with anger. Don't you dare judge us, Rebecca. You're not the one who grew up with his constant criticism, his impossible standards. You don't know what it's like. I know what it's like to care for someone who needs help, I retorted, even when it's hard, even when they push you away. The kitchen fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Clara busied herself with the dishes, clearly uncomfortable, while Ethan and I stared each other down. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice low and controlled. You think you're so noble, don't you? Saint Rebecca always doing the right thing. Well, let me tell you something. The rest of us are human. We get tired, we get frustrated, and sometimes, yes, we joke about things to cope. If you can't handle that, maybe you're the one with the problem. His words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, tears pricking at my eyes. I can't believe you just said that to me, I whispered. Before either of them could respond, I turned and fled the kitchen. As I ran up the stairs, I could hear Benjamin's gruff voice calling out, asking what all the commotion was about. In our bedroom, I sank onto the bed, my mind reeling. How had things gotten so bad so quickly? The loving family I thought I knew seemed to be crumbling before my eyes. As I sat there, trying to make sense of it all, a terrible realization dawned on me. The discord I'd sensed wasn't just about Benjamin. It was about me, too. Somehow, in trying to do what I thought was right, I'd placed myself on the outside of my own family. A soft knock at the door made me look up. It was Emma, our daughter, her young face creased with worry. Mom? Are you okay? I heard yelling. I forced a smile, patting the bed beside me. As Emma curled up next to me, I held her close, suddenly fiercely grateful for her presence. Whatever was happening with Ethan and his family, I knew one thing for certain. I would do whatever it took to protect my children from the growing storm. Little did I know, the true test of my resolve was yet to come. The hushed voices coming from the living room made my skin prickle. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, my hand gripping the banister as I strained to hear. It was Ethan, Clara, and Sarah, Ethan's sister. A family meeting, and I hadn't been invited. We can't go on like this, Sarah was saying, her voice tight with frustration. It's tearing us apart. I know, Ethan sighed, but what can we do? We can't just abandon Grandpa. Clara's voice cut in, sharp and decisive. We're not abandoning him. We're reallocating resources. My heart began to race. What were they planning? Rebecca seems to have everything under control, Clara continued. She's always so insistent on doing things her way. Well, let her. Mom, Ethan protested weakly, but Clara steamrolled on. I'm telling you, it's for the best. We'll move out, give them space. Rebecca can handle Grandpa, and we can all get our lives back. The silence that followed was deafening. I waited, breath held, for Ethan to object, to stand up for our family. But when he finally spoke, his words shattered my world. Maybe you're right, he said softly. Maybe it is for the best. I stumbled back, my vision blurring with tears. How could they? How could Ethan? Before I could confront them, Benjamin's gruff voice called out from upstairs. Rebecca, where's my tea? Wiping my eyes, I hurried to the kitchen, my mind reeling. As I prepared Benjamin's tea with shaking hands, I tried to make sense of what I'd heard. They were planning to leave us, to leave me, alone with Benjamin. The betrayal cut deep, but beneath the pain, a spark of determination ignited. I carried the tea upstairs, my resolve strengthening with each step. If they thought they could just walk away, they had another thing coming. About time, Benjamin grumbled as I entered his room. But his scowl softened slightly as he saw my face. What's wrong with you? You look like you've seen a ghost. For a moment, I considered telling him everything, but the stubborn set of his jaw, so like Ethan's, made me hesitate. Instead, I forced a smile. It's nothing, Grandpa Ben, just a long day. He harumphed, but his eyes narrowed suspiciously. Don't lie to me, girl. I may be old, but I'm not blind. Something's eating at you. I sank into the chair beside his bed, suddenly exhausted. It's Ethan and the others. They're talking about moving out, leaving us to care for you alone. I expected anger, perhaps another lecture about family loyalty. Instead, Benjamin's face crumpled, a vulnerability I'd never seen before shining through. I see, he said softly. Can't say I blame them. I haven't exactly been easy to live with. His admission stunned me. Grandpa Ben, he waved me off. Don't coddle me, Rebecca. I know what I've been like, but you... He reached out, his gnarled hand grasping mine. You've stood by me even when I didn't deserve it. Why? The question caught me off guard. Why had I? Because I believe there's more to you than just the grumpy old man act. Because family means something to me. And because sometimes the people who push us away are the ones who need us most. Benjamin's eyes glistened with unshed tears. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a deep breath, he squeezed my hand. You're a good woman, Rebecca. Better than this family deserves, maybe. So what are you going to do about those cowards downstairs? His question ignited the spark of determination in me once more. What was I going to do? I stood, squaring my shoulders. I'm going to fight for this family, Grandpa Ben. All of it, even the parts that don't think they want to be fought for. As I left his room, I heard him chuckle. That's my girl, he murmured. Descending the stairs, I steeled myself for the confrontation to come. They thought they could just decide our fate without me. They were about to learn how wrong they were. This wasn't just about Benjamin anymore. It was about the very foundation of our family, and I wasn't going down without a fight. The day Ethan left was the day I truly understood the meaning of heartbreak. I stood in the doorway, watching him load the last of his bags into the car, feeling as if my world was crumbling around me. Emma and Jack clung to my sides, their small faces etched with confusion and hurt. Daddy, why can't you stay? Emma's voice quivered, and I felt my resolve cracking. Ethan knelt down, his eyes avoiding mine. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Daddy just needs some time away, but I'll see you soon, okay? As he hugged our children goodbye, I caught Clara's eye over his shoulder. Her expression was a mix of guilt and defiance, and I felt a surge of anger. This was her doing, her idea of reallocating resources. When Ethan finally turned to me, I saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. Becca, I cut him off, my voice low and steady. Don't, just go. As the car pulled away, I felt Benjamin's presence behind me. Well, he grumbled, good riddance to bad rubbish, I say. I spun around, ready to snap at him, but the words died on my lips when I saw the pain in his eyes. He was hurting too, I realized. We all were. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills and paperwork. How was I supposed to manage all this on my own? The weight of responsibility felt crushing. A soft knock interrupted my spiraling thoughts. Mom? Jack peeked around the door, his eyes wide. Is Grandpa Ben okay? He's making weird noises. Alarmed, I rushed upstairs to Benjamin's room. The sound of labored breathing greeted me before I even opened the door. Inside, I found Benjamin hunched over, gasping for air. Grandpa Ben! I cried, rushing to his side. What's wrong? Talk to me. He couldn't speak, just gestured weakly at his chest. My heart racing, I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. The next few hours were a blur of ambulances, emergency rooms, and anxious waiting. As dawn broke, a tired-looking doctor approached me in the waiting room. Mrs. Thompson? Your grandfather-in-law is stable now. It was a severe asthma attack, exacerbated by stress and his recent hip surgery. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by guilt. How had I not known about his asthma? Had we all been so caught up in our own drama that we'd missed something so crucial? When I was finally allowed to see Benjamin, I found him looking small and fragile in the hospital bed. His gruff exterior had crumbled, leaving behind a vulnerable old man. I'm sorry, he whispered as I took his hand. I should have told you about the asthma. Didn't want to seem weak. I shook my head, fighting back tears. No, I'm sorry. We should have been paying closer attention. As we talked, I realized something profound was happening. The walls Benjamin had built up were crumbling, and for the first time, I saw the man beneath, scared, lonely, but with a core of strength that had weathered many storms. When I returned home that afternoon, exhausted but determined, I found Emma and Jack waiting anxiously. Is Grandpa Ben okay? Emma asked, her voice small. I knelt down, gathering them both in my arms. He will be, I assured them. And we're going to help him. Together. Looking into their brave little faces, I felt a surge of love and determination. Ethan and his family might have abandoned us, but we weren't broken. We were survivors. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, I made a silent vow. We would not just survive this, we would thrive. Benjamin, the children, and I, we would build something new and beautiful from the ashes of what we'd lost. As I closed their bedroom door, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time since this all began, I felt ready to face it. We were a family. Unconventional, perhaps, but bound by love and resilience, and that I realized was more powerful than any adversity we might face. My hands trembled as I smoothed down my blouse, stealing a glance at Benjamin in the passenger seat. 6 months had passed since that fateful night in the hospital, and the change in him was remarkable. Gone was the cantankerous old man, replaced by someone I'd grown to love and respect deeply. "Ready for this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Benjamin's eyes twinkled with a mischief I'd come to recognize. "Oh, I'm more than ready, my dear. Let's give them a show they'll never forget." As we pulled up to Clara's house, my stomach churned with anxiety. This was the first time we'd all be together since Ethan left. The children were spending the day with a friend, sparing them from what I feared would be an explosive family reunion. Clara answered the door, her smile faltering as she saw Benjamin standing tall beside me, no cane in sight. "Dad, you're walking so well. Amazing what proper care can do." Benjamin replied, his tone deceptively light. Ethan appeared behind his mother, his eyes widening at the sight of us. "Becca? We weren't expecting you both." "Clearly," I said, brushing past them into the house. The atmosphere in the living room was thick with tension as we all settled in. Sarah and her husband Tom exchanged nervous glances while Clara fussed unnecessarily with refreshments. Finally, Benjamin cleared his throat. "I suppose you're all wondering why we're here." "To be honest, Dad, we're just happy to see you doing so well," Sarah said, her voice tinged with guilt. Benjamin's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Oh, I'm doing more than well, Sarah. Thanks to Rebecca here, I've not only recovered, but I've had a revelation." The room fell silent, all eyes on Benjamin. My heart raced, knowing what was coming. "You see," he continued, his voice gaining strength, "these past months have been enlightening. I've seen who truly cares about family, about legacy, about doing what's right." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Grandpa, if this is about us leaving..." "This is about so much more than that, boy," Benjamin cut him off. "This is about character, about who has the strength to stand by family, even when it's difficult, even when it's inconvenient." I watched as realization dawned on their faces. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, while Ethan's jaw clenched tightly. "What are you saying, Dad?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Benjamin's eyes met mine, a silent question. I nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I'm saying," he said, turning back to his family, "that I've made a decision about the future of our family business. As of today, I'm naming Rebecca as the new head of Thompson Industries." The explosion was immediate. Clara leapt to her feet, face flushed with anger. "You can't be serious. She's not even blood." "She's more family than any of you have been," Benjamin shot back. Ethan turned to me, his eyes blazing. "You planned this, didn't you? This was your game all along." The accusation stung, but I held my ground. "The only game here, Ethan, is the one you and your family have been playing, abandoning your grandfather, abandoning our marriage." "Our marriage?" he scoffed. "You pushed me away." "Enough!" Benjamin's voice boomed, silencing the room. "My decision is final. Rebecca has shown true strength of character, true commitment to family. She's earned this." As the reality sank in, I watched the faces around me contort with a mix of shock, anger, and betrayal. Sarah was openly weeping, while Tom looked like he might be sick. Clara stood rigid, her eyes burning with fury. But it was Ethan's expression that hit me hardest. The man I had once loved, the father of my children, looked at me with such hatred that it took my breath away. In that moment, standing amidst the chaos we had unleashed, I realized there was no going back. The family I had married into was irreparably shattered, and I, Rebecca Thompson, once the outsider, now stood at its center, holding the reins of a legacy I never asked for. As Benjamin's hand found mine, squeezing it in solidarity, I took a deep breath. The storm had broken, and I was at its eye. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a heavy cloak as I strode through the doors of Thompson Industries. My heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing in the suddenly hushed lobby. Employees whispered and stared, no doubt wondering about the woman who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere to take control of their company. I straightened my spine, channeling every ounce of confidence I could muster. This was my world now, whether I was ready for it or not. As I reached my new office, Ethan's old office, I found Benjamin waiting for me, a proud smile on his weathered face. Ready to shake things up, Rebecca? I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. As ready as I'll ever be. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, decisions, and late nights. I threw myself into learning every aspect of the business, determined to prove Benjamin's faith in me wasn't misplaced. But with every success came a new challenge, often in the form of resistance from longtime employees loyal to Ethan and his family. It was after a particularly grueling board meeting that I found Ethan waiting outside my office, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice softer than I'd heard it in months. Against my better judgment, I let him in. As soon as the door closed behind us, Ethan's composure cracked. "I've been a fool, Becca," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I let my family cloud my judgment, push me away from what really matters, from you." I stood frozen, my heart pounding. This was the moment I'd dreamed of for so long, Ethan coming back admitting his mistakes. But as I looked at him, I realized something had fundamentally changed. "I want us to try again," Ethan continued, stepping closer. "For the kids, for us. We can make this work. I know we can." For a moment, I wavered. The memory of our life together, the family we'd built, tugged at my heart. But then I thought of Benjamin, of the trust he'd placed in me, of the strength I'd found within myself. "No, Ethan," I said, my voice steady. "We can't go back." His face fell, confusion and anger warring in his eyes. "What do you mean? Is this about the company? Because we can work something out." "It's not about the company," I interrupted. "It's about us. About who we've become." I moved to my desk, pulling out a manila envelope I'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. "I think it's time we made this official." Ethan's eyes widened as he realized what I was holding. "Divorce papers? Becca, you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," I replied, handing him the envelope. "You're no longer part of my inner circle, Ethan. You made that choice when you walked out on us." His face contorted with rage. "You conniving bitch! You planned this all along, didn't you? Worming your way into Grandpa's good graces, stealing my company, my life." I stood my ground, even as his words cut deep. "I didn't plan anything, Ethan. I simply chose to stand by family when you wouldn't." "This isn't over," he snarled, snatching the envelope. "You'll regret this, Rebecca. I'll make sure of it." As the door slammed behind him, I sank into my chair, my hands shaking. I'd done it. I'd chosen my path, burned the last bridge to my old life. The finality of it was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. It was my assistant, looking worried. "Mrs. Thompson, there's an urgent call from your children's school. There's been an incident." My blood ran cold. In that moment, as fear gripped my heart, I realized the true cost of my choices. I had gained a company, but had I put my children at risk? As I rushed out of the office, Ethan's threat echoed in my mind. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And suddenly, everything I had fought for seemed to be hanging by a thread. The day my divorce from Ethan was finalized felt like both an ending and a beginning. As I stood on the steps of the courthouse, the weight of the past year's struggles seemed to lift from my shoulders. I took a deep breath, savoring the crisp autumn air and the sense of freedom it brought. But my moment of peace was short-lived. My phone buzzed insistently, an urgent message from the office. Ethan and his family were making a last-ditch effort to wrest control of the company from me. They had called an emergency board meeting, claiming I was unfit to lead. I rushed to Thompson Industries, my mind racing. This was it, the final battle. As I entered the boardroom, the tension was palpable. Ethan sat at one end of the table, flanked by Clara and Sarah, their faces set in grim determination. The other board members looked uncertain, caught between the old guard and the new. "Rebecca," Ethan began, his voice dripping with false concern, "we've called this meeting because we believe the company is suffering under your leadership. It's time to return control to those who truly understand the Thompson legacy." I felt a flicker of doubt, but then I caught Benjamin's eye. He gave me a subtle nod, and I remembered why I was here. I straightened my spine and addressed the room. "Members of the board," I said, my voice steady, "I know there have been changes since I took over. Change can be scary, but let me show you exactly what those changes have accomplished." For the next hour, I laid out the company's growth under my leadership, increased profits, expanded market share, and improved employee satisfaction. With each point, I saw the doubt in the board members' eyes turn to interest. then admiration. Ethan tried to interject, his face growing redder by the minute, but I held my ground. This company isn't just about legacy, I concluded. It's about innovation, adaptation, and treating people, all people, with respect. That's the true Thompson spirit, and that's what I've brought back to this company. The room fell silent as the board members exchanged glances. Then, one by one, they began to nod. The vote was called, and the result was unanimous. I would remain as CEO. As the meeting adjourned, I watched Ethan and his family storm out, their last grasp at power slipping away. I felt a twinge of sadness for what once was, but it was overshadowed by pride in what I had accomplished. Later that evening, I sat in my living room, surrounded by the warmth of my chosen family. Emma and Jack were curled up on either side of me, while Benjamin sat in his favorite armchair, looking more content than I'd ever seen him. "You did it, kiddo," Benjamin said, raising his glass of sparkling cider in a toast. "You saved the company and our family." I smiled, hugging my children close. "We did it together," I corrected him. "All of us." As I looked around at the faces of those I loved most in the world, I realized that this moment of peace, love, and triumph was what I had been fighting for all along. Not just a company or a title, but a true sense of family and purpose. The road had been hard, filled with betrayals and heartache, but it had led me here, to a place where I was stronger, wiser, and more fulfilled than I ever thought possible. "Mom," Emma said, looking up at me with curious eyes, "are you happy now?" I felt tears prick my eyes as I answered honestly, "Happier than I've ever been, sweetheart." And as the evening wore on, filled with laughter and love, I knew that this was just the beginning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them. Not as the woman I had been, but as the woman I had become. A woman who had taken adversity and turned it into opportunity, who had found strength in vulnerability, and who had learned that true family is not always bound by blood, but by love, loyalty, and shared struggles. This was my new chapter, my new life, and I couldn't wait to see where it would lead.
You had leukemia, didn't you? Can't believe you're still alive. My father, who had chosen his mistress over me, and my mother 15 years ago when I was diagnosed at age 10, uttered these unbelievable words when we unexpectedly met at a restaurant. "And who's that girl next to you? Surely she's not your child?" The father's gaze shifted to Mia, who sat beside me, his expression sour. "Yes, she's my daughter. I got married 3 years ago. I thought you'd be struggling and living in poverty. Just like you and your mother, always a burden to society." Angered by his words, I stood up, unable to tolerate any insult towards my mother, who had raised me single-handedly. "Well, it's been a while. Welcome to my restaurant." My father, surprised by my mother's words, visibly widened his eyes in clear astonishment. "What, you're joking? That's not funny at all." "Oh, I'll explain properly then." Seeking revenge, my mother began to tell him about our current lives. "I'm Anna, 25 years old. Today, I am here for lunch at a famous hamburger specialty restaurant with my husband Tony and our 1-year-old daughter Mia. This popular restaurant recently expanded its stores, a place we had always wanted to visit. My mother was supposed to join us for lunch too, but she's running late due to a train delay." "Mama, gimme." Yes, just wait a bit longer." I watched my daughter, Mia, pointing at the food on the next table, clearly hungry and begging for food. "Did you hear from Mom?" "Yes, she just arrived at the station. She should be here soon." "Do you think the restaurant is hard to find?" "I'll go pick her up from the station." "Tony, thank you." With that, Tony quickly put on his coat and left the restaurant. I thought, he's always so thoughtful. I'm glad I married him. I've always wanted a warm family because my parents divorced when I was 10. My mother told me that even when I was little, my father prioritized having fun over taking care of his kids. I remember him ignoring me even when I was sick in bed, and my parents often fought. Still, my mother took great care of me. She always came to my school events, but my father, busy with work, never came. The turning point for our family came when I was 10. One day, I was bedridden at home with a high fever. Every doctor we saw said it was just a cold. However, the fever continued for weeks without any sign of subsiding. As 2 weeks approached, my parents argued about whether to take me to a university hospital. I've told you many times. She's had a high fever for 2 weeks. It's just a coincidence. The doctor said it's a cold. Besides, do you know how much it costs to go to a university hospital? It's just a waste of money. How can you say that when Anna is suffering? Just do whatever you want. I'm not giving you any money. With that, my father left. I was delirious, but I still remember his back as he walked away. Shortly after, my mother took me to the university hospital, and I underwent a thorough examination. When it was over, the doctor spoke seriously to my mother. Please stay calm. The tests show she has leukemia. That can't be. If we had delayed the tests any longer, it could have been dangerous. You did well to bring her in. Hearing that, my mother apparently cried, relieved she hadn't made a mistake. I was soon admitted to the hospital and began treatment. Fortunately, the treatment started quickly and I was young enough to recover well. So my condition stabilized in about a month. My mother had kept in touch with my father, but he never visited during my hospitalization. When I was discharged and returned home, my father was no longer there. As I was confused, my mother calmly explained. Anna, listen carefully. Your father probably won't come back. Mom, what do you mean? Your father had been seeing another woman. As soon as he found out you were sick, he stopped contacting us. I guessed he would just leave. Can't I see Dad anymore? He chose his mistress over us. Understanding this, I felt an overwhelming sadness. Seeing me about to cry, my mother hugged me gently. It's okay, you have me. I won't let you feel lonely. As she said that, she hugged me even tighter. From then on, she raised me alone. While working, she took care of me and showered me with love. Though our time together was short, I never felt lonely. Gradually, I wanted to become a strong and kind woman like her. As I remembered these old times, I waited for Tony to return with my mother. Then, a familiar voice called out my name. Anna, is that you? I turned around in surprise to see an elderly man in ragged clothes. His beard was overgrown, and his hair looked unwashed for days. He was far from well dressed. I thought, I feel like I've seen him somewhere. I racked my brain but couldn't remember where. As I looked puzzled, the man laughed mockingly. Don't you remember your own father's face? You're still foolish as ever. Dad. Why are you here? What do you mean why? I came to eat. Is that a problem? Not really. Indeed, his smiling face resembled my father's from long ago. But my father should be 55 now. The man standing before me, dressed as he was, looked over 70. I thought I would never see my father again after he abandoned us. As a child, every time I remembered him and felt sad, I tried hard to forget him. Perhaps that's why I didn't recognize him immediately. More than the joy of seeing my father after so many years, I felt a complex mix of emotions. At a loss for words, my father spoke again. I mean, I didn't think you'd still be alive. What do you mean? You know, you had leukemia, right? Thanks to Mom taking me to the hospital right away, I recovered quickly. I still go to the hospital regularly. If we had delayed even a little, I might not have been able to live a normal life. Ha, that's good. I thought, his casual remark, after he insisted on leaving me alone back then. I felt anger rise within me as my father laughed it off as if it were someone else's problem. I glared at him, but he continued the conversation without concern. So, who's the girl next to you? Surely not your child. I looked at Mia sitting beside me. My father's expression was somewhat displeased. Yes, she's my daughter. I got married 3 years ago. Her name is Mia. She's 1 year old. What's the problem? It's none of your business. I thought you'd be struggling and living in poverty. After all, you and Susan are just burdens to society. How dare you say that? I stood up abruptly and raised my voice. Mia looked up at me, startled. I knew talking to him was pointless. I understood that. But I couldn't stand him insulting my mother, who had endured so much to raise me. Indeed, at the time, it seems it was quite a struggle to come up with the money for my sudden hospitalization and subsequent frequent visits. I saw my mother pleading with the hospital to delay payments while I was admitted. That's why I am so grateful and respectful toward her. And each time, my disdain for my father grew. With Mia present and not wanting to disturb the other customers, I couldn't afford to start a fight here. As my father and I were glaring at each other, Tony returned with my mother. Seeing me standing, Tony asked worriedly, "Anna, what happened? And who is this man?" "This is my father." "What? I thought your parents divorced when you were little." "Why is he here?" "I don't know. He just happened to be here. So, I came here to eat." "Got a problem with that?" my father said grumpily, creating a tense atmosphere among us. Then my mother, standing behind Tony, addressed my father. "Wow, long time no see. How many years has it been?" "Ah, you're here too. It's been a while. I never thought we'd meet again." "Why are you here? This place is popular lately, right?" "Wanted to try it out." "Oh, I'm glad. Welcome to my restaurant." My father's eyes widened, clearly taken aback by my mother's words. And he began to laugh weakly. "Ha, your restaurant? That's a good joke." "It's no joke. This is my restaurant. Well, one of many I own." "What do you mean?" My father was confused by my mother's unexpected statement. But she explained calmly. "Just as I said. I own this hamburger specialty store. It was originally a small business started by my father. After you left, I started helping out to make ends meet. Thanks to Mom getting involved, the stores started to multiply. Aren't we about to go national soon? No way you could do that. It's just a coincidence, isn't it?" My father seemed unwilling to acknowledge my mother's success. Just as I was about to retort, Tony spoke up. "Father, no offense, but maybe it's time you accepted it? Are you Anna's husband? What does this have to do with you? What do you even know?" "Well, it does concern me. Actually, I work at the corporate headquarters of this company." "That's right. Tony is one of our promising young executives. He's currently working as an executive candidate at the headquarters. Susan's ideas and proposals are always customer-oriented and have gained a lot of support within the company." "Thank you. I have high expectations for you." No, thank you very much." Tony and my mother spoke happily. Seeing them, I felt proud. Glancing at my father, his mouth hung open in shock. He looked down on my mother, who had become a company owner. And me, a frail child who married a promising young employee and had a child. He couldn't accept that the two he abandoned were leading happy lives. What? I don't care about you guys. With that parting shot, my father hurried to the entrance. However, he hadn't paid yet and was stopped by a staff member trying to leave the restaurant without paying. He was then taken to the back office. After a while, a police car pulled up in front of the store. 3 officers entered and headed to the office. Watching the scene, a person who appeared to be the manager hurried over to my mother to explain the situation. It turns out my father was a habitual offender of dining and dashing. Not just at this hamburger store, but he had also caused trouble at other nearby stores. This time, he was caught in the act and arrested. He's been resisting the police. I could hear him talking loudly. It seems he's been having trouble with his family, and that led to his actions. After saying this to my mother, the manager returned to the office. I wondered what kind of situation had led my once hardworking father to resort to such measures. Seeing the father who had lost all semblance of his former self, I felt a bit of pity. The atmosphere at our table went completely silent. Then, my mother suddenly clapped her hands, looking at me and Tony. Now that the troublemaker is gone, let's enjoy a delicious meal. Mom. The new seasonal hamburger is really something special. Tony, I'm sorry for involving you in our family issues. No, I don't mind at all. As my mother spoke, I felt my tense heart begin to relax. She must have been trying to create a bright atmosphere for me and Tony. I thought, I guess I still can't match up to my mother. With that thought, I decided to forget about my father and enjoy lunch with the 4 of us. A few days later, I received a call from an unknown number on my smartphone. I thought, I've been contacting various places lately for Mia's daycare. Maybe it's related to that. I didn't have any strong leads, but I answered the phone anyway. To my dismay, it was the last voice I wanted to hear. It was my father. Hello? Anna? Dad? How did you get my number? Well, that doesn't matter, does it? Laughing carelessly, I wondered where he had gotten my number. Despite my anxiety, now wasn't the time to worry about that. The more pressing question was why he had called. Given that he had been driven to petty crimes, I didn't know what to expect from him now. I cautiously asked him, "So, what do you want? What are you planning to do to us?" "Hey, don't be so cold. I've actually got a good proposal for you and your mom." "What do you mean by a good proposal?" "Listen up and be happy. I'll remarry Susan. Knowing her, she's probably still single, right?" "Dad, do you realize what you're saying?" "Of course, I do. Aren't you happy? Is this man insane? How could he think that abandoning us and then proposing to remarry would make us happy? There's no way my mother would accept it. How could I be happy about that? Have you forgotten what you did to us in the past? You mean when I left? If you want me to apologize, I'm sorry. The selfishness of my father infuriates me. I feel like I might say something harsh in anger. But I can't upset him now. I have my mother, Tony, and Mia to think about. I need to stay calm for their sake. My left hand, holding the smartphone, trembles with anger. Gripping it with my right hand to steady it, I asked my father, "So, what brought this on all of a sudden? What happened with the woman you were with?" "Oh, her? After I left home, a while later, we had a son. I see. I thought I'd live happily with my new family. Especially since my sick daughter was out of the picture. But that woman, she was reckless with money. Even after our son was born, she never stopped going out. Kept buying designer bags, and before I knew it, she had run up debts without my knowledge. By the time I realized, she had vanished. My father spoke calmly about his situation, which was more troubled than I had imagined. I had assumed he was living happily after leaving us, but it seems that was not the case. His disheveled appearance and his dine and dash habits now made sense. He must have had his struggles. But that doesn't mean I should feel sorry for him. Look, she's got money, right? Think of it as filial piety and ask your mom, would you? Unbelievable. What? Don't bring this up now. How could you think I would forgive you? Hey, calm down. I am calm. Handle your own money. And don't ever involve us again. With that, I hung up the phone. He abandoned my mother and me when we were vulnerable. And now he turns to us when he's in trouble. He truly is the worst. I immediately informed my mother about the call. So I told him never to contact us again. I see. I'm sorry you had to go through that, Anna. It's okay. It's unbelievable, though. Did he really think I'd accept such a ridiculous proposal? My mother sighed in disbelief. She told me to ignore any further attempts to contact us and hung up the phone. Just as my mother predicted, calls from what seemed to be my father's number came several times. I ignored all of them, and eventually, they stopped. He must have given up after being ignored so thoroughly. One day, I took Mia to visit my mother, who had just finished a busy period and was happy to see her granddaughter. Mia was also having a great time. While chatting with my mother and playing with Mia, the doorbell suddenly rang. Oh, what could that be? Maybe it's a delivery? Should I get it? You keep playing with Mia. Would you? Thank you. I stood up and went to the intercom. My blood ran cold when I saw who was on the screen. It was my father. I thought, how? I never told him where we moved. My heart raced as I struggled to stay calm and breathed deeply. Mom, Dad's here. What do you mean? He shouldn't know where we live since he left and we moved. He might have come here because I ignored his calls. But how did he find the house? While talking with my mother, the doorbell rang again. We decided to pretend no one was home, trying not to make any noise. However, the doorbell continued to ring repeatedly. Despite our continued silence, the knocking on the front door began, growing louder and more insistent. Hey, I know you're in there. Open the door. What should we do? You guys have money. Hurry up and hand it over. My father was getting increasingly agitated, raising his voice dangerously. It wasn't safe anymore, not for my mom or Mia. Something had to be done. Just then, my mother suddenly stood up and walked toward the door. And to my disbelief, she opened it. I thought, Mom, what are you doing? I hurried after her to the entrance. As my mother opened the door, my father tried to barge in. Despite this, my mother began to speak calmly. What are you doing? It's about time you opened up. You have money, right? Hand it over quickly. Yes, we do have money. But there's none for you. Just as my father attempted to strike her, a police officer grabbed his arm from behind. All right, calm down, please. The police? We received a call earlier. You're under arrest for trespassing. Trespassing? But she's my wife. Ignoring my father's protests, the police officers quickly restrained him and took him to their patrol car. As I stood there dumbfounded, my mother calmly locked the door. "Mom, how could you remain so calm? You said there was a call earlier, but who?" "Oh, I called the police while you were checking the intercom." "Really?" I didn't notice at all. The police can't arrest someone without catching them in the act. That's why I deliberately let him in. As I slumped down, exhausted by the ordeal, my mother chuckled. How strong could one person be? I wondered if I would ever catch up to her. Later, we were informed by the police that my father was jailed. He was not only arrested for this incident but was also charged with multiple other offenses, including shoplifting and dine and dashing. Unable to afford bail, he remained in custody. My mother also concerned herself with my father's son, contacting child services. They later informed us that the boy, now a junior in high school, was living in a facility. He was doing well and excelling academically. So they assured us there wasn't much to worry about. Although he wasn't living with his father, he occasionally visited him. "Look, Mia, here's the new hamburger. Eat up." "Thanks, Grandma." Years have passed, and Mia has grown significantly. Watching their cheerful conversation fills me with happiness. I never thought I'd be so disrupted by my father at this age. While I feel sorry for him, I certainly don't aspire to be like him. Instead, I'll use his example as a lesson on how not to live, striving for a happy life.
In the quiet comfort of my childhood home, where each creaking floorboard holds a memory, I stand frozen, grappling with the words that just shattered the stillness. Gregory, my husband of 8 years, his face an unreadable mask, drops the bombshell that upends everything. "Lydia, it's decided. Alara is moving in and your mother needs to go to a nursing home. If you're not okay with that, we can always divorce," he states coldly. Behind him, Alara, his sister, smirks with a venomous glee that chills me to the bone. Their cruelty, stark and unapologetic, feels like a physical blow. I've always believed in the sanctity of family, in the bonds that were supposed to be unbreakable. But here I am, watching those bonds fray and snap before my very eyes. My mother, frail and vulnerable since Dad's passing, has become a mere inconvenience in their scheme. Divorce? The word tastes bitter as I spit it out, disbelief lacing my voice. "You'd throw away our marriage all for her?" Gregory shrugs, his indifference a sharp contrast to the tempest raging inside me. "Lydia, it's simple. Alara needs a place to stay, and frankly, your mother is just taking up space. We need to think practically." Practically? The audacity of his words stings. This house, brimming with decades of love and laughter, reduced to mere square footage in his eyes. I glance at my mother, sitting in her favorite armchair, a look of utter defeat etched on her face. The image of her being sent away, discarded like an old piece of furniture, ignites a fire within me. "Fine," I say, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "If divorce is what you want, Gregory, then you'll have it. But know this, I will not let you toss my mother aside like she's nothing." Gregory's eyes widen in surprise. Clearly, he hadn't expected me to call his bluff. Alara's smirk falters, her confidence shaken. In that moment, a plan begins to form in my mind. A plan to not only escape this toxic marriage, but to expose their callousness for what it truly is. They think they can manipulate me, break me down, and cast aside the people I love most. They're sorely mistaken. As I head to my room, the words of my father echo in my mind, a mantra of strength and resilience. Never let anyone dim your light, Lydia. Stand tall, even in the darkest of times. Tonight, as I lay in bed, I'm not just planning a divorce. I'm planning a reckoning. Gregory and Alara have awakened a side of me they'll wish they hadn't. I'll protect my mother and our home, no matter what it takes. This is more than just a marital dispute. It's a battle for dignity, for respect, and for the sanctity of the home I've loved my whole life. They may have declared war, but I'm more than ready to fight back. The morning light filters through the curtains, casting a warm glow over what feels like the aftermath of a storm. Today, the battle lines are drawn. I'm not just fighting for my mother's dignity. I'm fighting for my own. I start the day with a phone call to a lawyer, my voice steady but my hands trembling. The lawyer, a woman named Miss Hernandez, listens intently as I explain the situation. "Mrs. Graham, we can start the divorce proceedings immediately," she assures me. "And regarding your mother, we'll ensure she stays right where she belongs." Her words are a balm, and for the first time since Gregory's ultimatum, I feel a flicker of hope. As I hang up, I'm met with the sight of Gregory and Alara in the kitchen, their laughter grating against my nerves. Alara, perched on a stool, is flipping through a magazine, while Gregory prepares breakfast with an air of forced normalcy. "Good morning, Lydia," Gregory says, his tone casual, as if our world hadn't just crumbled. "I've contacted a lawyer," I reply, my voice devoid of emotion. "We're getting a divorce, Gregory, and my mother is staying." Alara's eyes snap up from her magazine, her earlier smugness replaced by shock. "You're serious? You'd really throw away your marriage over this?" "Over this?" I echo, my anger simmering. "This is about respect, Alara, something you know nothing about." Gregory sets down the spatula, his face hardening. "You're being irrational, Lydia. You can't just—" "Irrational?" I cut him off. "No, Gregory. What's irrational is expecting me to abandon my mother for your sister's convenience." The tension in the room is palpable, a silent war raging with every word exchanged. My mother shuffles into the room, her presence a reminder of what's at stake. "Lydia, is everything all right?" she asks, her voice frail. "Everything's going to be fine, Mom," I assure her, my resolve strengthening. Gregory and Alara exchange a look, a silent conversation that speaks volumes. They had underestimated me, and now they're scrambling. In the following days, the house becomes a battlefield of silent glares and unspoken words. Alara's presence, once just an annoyance, now feels like a constant provocation. Every smug smile, every dismissive gesture, fuels my determination. The day I receive the divorce papers, my hands shake as I sign them. There's no joy in this victory, only a deep sense of loss for what could have been. But as I watch Gregory's face fall when I hand them to him, I feel a surge of empowerment. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" I say, my voice steady. "Freedom from us, from responsibility. Well, you've got it." Gregory's response is a mumbled excuse, a feeble attempt to justify his actions. But I'm done listening. I'm done being the one who bends. As I retreat to my room, the reality of what I've set in motion hits me. There's no turning back now, but in this moment of solitude, I don't feel fear or regret. I feel a fierce sense of pride. I am Lydia Graham, and I will not be broken. Not by Gregory, not by Alara, and certainly not by the cruel hand fate has dealt me. This is just the beginning. The real battle is yet to come, and I am ready for it. The days following the initiation of the divorce proceedings feel like navigating a minefield in what used to be my sanctuary. Gregory's aloofness and Alara's scornful glances are constant reminders of the battle I'm embroiled in. But I refuse to be intimidated in my own home. A week later, I'm sitting across from Miss Hernandez in her office, the divorce papers spread out like a map of a battlefield. "The good news," she begins, her eyes scanning the documents, "is that you have a strong case for keeping the house, especially given your mother's condition." I nod, a mixture of relief and sorrow washing over me. This house, once a symbol of familial warmth, has become the core of my struggle. "But," Miss Hernandez continues, "there's something unusual. It seems Gregory has significant debts, ones he's kept hidden." "Debts?" The word hits me like a wave. Gregory's secretive phone calls and sudden expenses now make a chilling sense. The realization that he's not only betrayed my trust but also endangered our financial security is a bitter pill to swallow. Can he claim the house because of these debts? I ask, my voice barely above a whisper. It's unlikely, given the circumstances. But we need to be prepared, she replies, her tone firm yet reassuring. Armed with this new information, I return home, my mind racing. The sight of Alara lounging in the living room, her feet disrespectfully propped up on the coffee table, ignites my anger. "Enjoying yourself?" I ask, unable to mask my contempt. Alara looks up, her eyes cold. "Oh, I'm just getting comfortable. After all, it's going to be my home soon." Her smugness is like a slap in the face, but I stand my ground. "Actually, Alara, you might want to start looking for another place." The house isn't going to be part of the divorce settlement. Her smirk fades, replaced by a flicker of panic. What do you mean? Gregory said. What Gregory said and what's legal are two different things, I cut her off. And while we're at it, let's discuss your brother's hidden debts. Alara's face drains of color. Debts? What are you talking about? Oh, don't play dumb, Alara. It's unbecoming, I retort. Gregory's financial troubles are going to complicate things for both of you. For the first time since she arrived, I see uncertainty in Alara's eyes. The revelation of Gregory's debts seems to have shaken her confidence, her facade of control slipping. Gregory walks in at that moment, his face a mask of confusion. Lydia, what's this about debts? Ask your brother, Alara. He seems to have been keeping secrets from both of us, I say, turning to leave the room. As I walk away, I can't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The tables are turning, and for once, Gregory and Alara are the ones caught off guard. But this is more than just a game of one-upmanship. It's about justice, about reclaiming my life and protecting my mother. Gregory and Alara may have thought they could control me, but they're about to learn just how wrong they were. The battle lines have been drawn, and I'm not just defending my ground, I'm advancing. The following days are a blur of cold exchanges and tense silences. Gregory's once familiar presence now feels like an oppressive cloud hanging over the house. Alara, though visibly shaken by the revelation of the debts, clings to her disdainful attitude. But their veneer of confidence is cracking, and I intend to shatter it. One evening, a week after my meeting with Miss Hernandez, I receive an unexpected phone call. It's from Posey, my mother-in-law. Her voice, usually laced with subtle barbs, now trembles with unease. Lydia, we need to talk. Can you come over? She asks, a note of desperation in her tone. The next day, I find myself at Gregory's parents' house, a place I had once considered a second home. The door opens, and Posey stands there, her usual poise replaced by a nervous fidgeting. What is it, Posey? Why the sudden need to talk? I ask, stepping inside. In the living room, the air is thick with tension. Posey wrings her hands, a clear sign of her anxiety. Lydia, we heard about the divorce and the debts. Gregory never told us. Seems he didn't tell anyone, I reply, my words sharp. Posey sighs, the weight of her son's actions bearing down on her. Lydia, please, is there any way this can be resolved without all this mess? I can't help but feel a bitter satisfaction at her discomfort. This was the woman who had subtly undermined me at every turn, who had always favored her son's whims over my well-being. Posey, you're asking me to overlook your son's betrayal, his lies, and his attempt to throw my mother out of her own house. You think that can just be swept under the rug? I demand, my voice rising. Posey flinches, the reality of my words hitting her hard. I didn't know about all that, she stammers. That's the problem, Posey. You never knew, or perhaps never wanted to know. Gregory and Alara's actions are a reflection of what they've been taught, what they've been allowed to get away with, I say, my gaze unwavering. For a moment, Posey seems lost for words, the veneer of the matriarch crumbling before me. Then, with a heavy sigh, she speaks. I'm sorry, Lydia. I didn't realize. As I leave their house, Posey's apology echoing in my ears, I feel a complex mix of emotions. Anger, certainly, at the years of subtle jabs and favoritism, but also a sense of closure, of having spoken my truth to the woman who had, in many ways, enabled Gregory's behavior. This isn't just a victory in the battle of the divorce, it's a personal victory, a reclaiming of my voice and my worth. Gregory and Alara may have started this war, but I'm the one who's going to end it. And as I drive back to my house, to the life I'm fighting to protect, I know one thing for certain. I am not the same woman they thought they could control. I am stronger, fierier, and more determined than ever. The real battle is just beginning, and I am ready for it. The finalization of the divorce arrives like a storm, fierce and liberating. Gregory's signature on the papers is more than a legal formality. It's the end of a chapter filled with betrayal and the beginning of a new narrative written on my terms. In the aftermath, I find myself standing in the now quiet house, a sense of solemn victory washing over me. The property is mine, and my mother's place in her own home is secure. But the win is bittersweet. The house feels larger, emptier. Alara had moved out the day before the divorce was finalized, her departure marked by a sullen silence that was a stark contrast to her usual brashness. As she left, our eyes met, and for a fleeting second, I saw something that resembled regret. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the familiar scowl. In the weeks that follow, I focus on rebuilding. The house undergoes a transformation, each change a step towards reclaiming my space. Fresh paint, new curtains, and the removal of everything that reminds me of Gregory and Alara. My mother watches this process, her eyes reflecting a mix of sadness and relief. "Lydia, are you sure about all this?" she asks one evening, her voice tinged with concern. "I've never been more sure, Mom," I reply, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "This is our home, and it's time we made new memories here." But the past isn't ready to let go just yet. One evening, a knock on the door disrupts the newfound peace. Standing on the doorstep is Oswald, Gregory's father. His eyes are weary, his posture resigned. "Lydia, I need to talk to you," he says, his voice heavy. I lead him into the living room, offering a seat but not warmth. Oswald looks around, a sad smile playing on his lips. "This house, it's changed," he observes. "It needed to," I respond, my tone neutral. Oswald nods, understanding the unspoken words. "Lydia, I'm here to apologize. For Gregory, for Alara, and for how we treated you and your mother." His apology, sincere as it may be, doesn't erase the pain. But it's a start, a small step towards healing. Oswald talks about Gregory, about his failures and mistakes, painting a picture of a man lost in his own shortcomings. "I don't expect forgiveness, Lydia. I just wanted you to know that we see the pain we caused." Oswald says he stands to leave. His departure leaves me with a sense of closure, albeit a complicated one. The battle may be over, but the scars remain. Yet in their own way, they're a testament to my strength, to the journey I've undertaken. As I sit there, in the quiet aftermath of Oswald's visit, I realize that this battle has been about more than just a divorce or a house. It's been about finding my voice, about standing up for myself and my mother, and in doing so, I've discovered a resilience I never knew I had. The future is uncertain, but it's mine to shape, and whatever it holds, I know I'll face it with the same strength that brought me through this storm. Life after the divorce settles into a new rhythm, a dance of healing and rediscovery. The house, now infused with a sense of liberation, becomes a haven for my mother and me. But just when I start to believe that the storm has passed, the winds of the past swirl back into my life. It happens on a quiet Tuesday evening. My phone rings, and Gregory's name flashes on the screen, a ghost from a chapter I had closed. I answer, curiosity piqued and defenses up. "Lydia, I need to talk to you." Gregory's voice comes through, hesitant and strained. "Why, Gregory? What's left to say?" I ask, my tone guarded. "It's about everything. I've made mistakes, Lydia, big ones. I realize that now," he says, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. His words, meant to convey remorse, only stir a well of bitterness within me. "Mistakes? You call uprooting our lives and siding with Alara against your own wife and her mother just mistakes?" Gregory pauses, and when he speaks again, his voice is laced with something akin to regret. "I was wrong, Lydia, about Alara, about how I treated you and your mother. I see that now." The confession, though unexpected, doesn't soften the sharp edges of my memories. Realizations don't erase actions, Gregory. You chose your path. There's a shuffling sound, and I picture Gregory pacing, a habit of his when cornered. I know, but Lydia, I miss you. I miss us." The admission hangs in the air, a plea wrapped in nostalgia, but the man I loved, the man I thought I knew, vanished long ago, replaced by a stranger. "Miss us? Gregory, there is no us anymore. You made sure of that," my voice steady. Gregory's voice breaks slightly. "Can we meet, just once, to talk? Please, Lydia." The request, a blend of hope and despair, makes me pause. Part of me yearns for closure, for a final goodbye to the man I once shared my life with. But another part, the part hardened by betrayal, knows better. "No, Gregory, there's nothing left to discuss. We've said all there is to say," I say, the finality in my voice sealing the conversation. As I end the call, a sense of empowerment washes over me. The Gregory, who stood on my doorstep all those months ago, demanding changes I couldn't accept, is no more. In his place stands a man broken by his choices, seeking solace in a past that no longer exists. That night, as I sit with my mother, sharing stories and laughter, I realize the full extent of my journey. From a woman caught in the tides of others' decisions to one who commands her own destiny. The road ahead is mine to travel, with its twists and turns, its shadows and lights. But one thing is clear. I am no longer the woman who once sought validation in the eyes of a man who could not see her worth. I am Lydia, whole and unbroken, master of my story. In the weeks that follow my last conversation with Gregory, life takes on a peaceful rhythm. My mother and I find joy in the small things: gardening, cooking, and long walks in the neighborhood. The house, once a battleground, is now a sanctuary of tranquility. But just as I begin to bask in the calm, an unexpected encounter jolts me back to reality. It's a sunny Saturday morning, and I'm at the local market when I spot Alara. She's at a fruit stand, her once haughty demeanor replaced by a look of wariness. Our eyes meet, and for a moment time stands still. I approach her, curiosity getting the better of me. "Alara, it's been a while." She turns, her face a mask of surprise and discomfort. "Lydia, yeah, it has." Her voice lacks its usual edge, her posture deflated. The sight of her so diminished stirs a complex mix of emotions within me. "I heard about the debts, the troubles you and Gregory are facing," I say, keeping my tone neutral. Alara lets out a sigh, the fight seemingly drained from her. "Yeah, things didn't quite go as planned. Gregory's struggling, and I guess I didn't help matters." Her admission, a rare glimpse of vulnerability, takes me aback. "I suppose we all have our lessons to learn," I reply. Alara nods, a flicker of something like remorse crossing her face. "I just wanted to say, Lydia, I'm sorry. For everything." The apology, unexpected and raw, leaves me momentarily speechless. This was the woman who had once seemed incapable of regret, now standing before me, seeking forgiveness. "Apology noted, Alara. But it doesn't change what happened," I say, my words firm but not unkind. "I know," she replies, her gaze dropping. I needed you to know." We part ways, the encounter leaving a trail of mixed feelings in its wake. As I walk back home, I reflect on the journey I've embarked on, the pain, the betrayal, and the triumphs. In the solitude of the evening, I sit with my mother on our porch, the sunset painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. We talk about the future, about the possibilities that lie ahead. "Mom, do you think I did the right thing?" I ask, seeking affirmation. She takes my hand, her eyes warm and understanding. "Lydia, you stood up for yourself and for me. You showed strength and grace in the face of adversity. Yes, you did the right thing." Her words settle in my heart, a comforting affirmation of my choices. As the night falls, I realize that this chapter of my life, though fraught with challenges, has been a crucible of transformation. I am no longer defined by the shadows of my past. I am a woman reborn, resilient, and free. My story, once entangled in the whims of others, is now mine to write. And as I look to the stars, I make a silent vow to live a life of authenticity, to cherish the love of my mother, and to embrace the endless possibilities that await. I am Lydia Graham, and my journey is just beginning. I was standing in the kitchen, the phone pressed against my ear, disbelief washing over me in cold waves. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harper, your mother passed away." The voice on the other end, a doctor from Chicago General Hospital, sounded distant, like a faint echo in a long, empty hallway. "My mother?" I murmured, my voice barely a whisper. The room spun, and I gripped the countertop for support. Last week, we had talked about her coming over for Thanksgiving. She was fine then. How could this be? I had to tell Martin. He had been working in Europe for the past 3 months, and communication had been sparse, but he needed to know. I dialed his number, my hands trembling. After several rings, he answered. "Martin, it's Elaine. My mom, she passed away." There was a pause, and then his voice, devoid of warmth, came through. "Oh, I see. Look, Elaine, I'm really tied up right now. I've got a trip planned with the guys to Barcelona. Can't really skip it." His words hit me like a physical blow. "You're not coming back? Not even for the funeral?" I struggled to keep my voice steady. "Elaine, you know how it is with my job. I'll be back in a couple of months. Just handle things there, okay?" And without waiting for my response, he hung up. I stood there, the phone still in my hand, feeling a hollow emptiness growing inside me. My mother was gone, and the man I had spent 20 years with couldn't care less. The next few days passed in a blur of arrangements and condolences, a relentless march of reality that I navigated like a ghost. It was on the 3rd day, in the midst of this, that I received another call that seemed to stop time altogether. It was Martin's brother, Alex. "Elaine, there's been an accident." Mom and Dad, they're gone. The phone slipped from my grasp and clattered to the floor. Martin's parents, too? It felt like some cruel joke, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I called Martin, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I left message after message, each one more desperate than the last. I couldn't go to his parents' funeral. Without Martin, I was just an outsider, a reminder of the son who couldn't be bothered to show up. The thought of their empty seats, an unspoken accusation in the air, was unbearable. As the days passed, I found myself sitting alone in the house we had built together, surrounded by memories that now seemed like lies. I thought back to how we met, introduced by our fathers who were old college friends. It had felt like a fairy tale then, our families joining together in a bond of love and friendship. But as the years went by, the fairy tale had slowly faded. Martin was always busy, always absent. His work was his life, and I, along with our son Peter, were just fixtures in his world. When Peter was 10, my father passed away. My rock, my confidant, gone. Martin had been away on a business trip then, too. I was left alone to deal with the grief, to support our son, to keep the family together. And now, with both our families shattered, I was alone again. Our marriage had become a routine of loneliness and resentment. I was the homemaker, the silent supporter, while Martin was the absent provider. But was he really providing, or just running away from a life he no longer wanted? I tried to remember the last time we had laughed together or shared a moment of genuine connection. But all I could see was the growing distance between us, a chasm filled with unspoken words and unmet needs. As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, I realized that this wasn't just about his absence. It was about the lack of respect, the lack of empathy. It was about a marriage that had become a hollow shell of what it once was. And as the sun set, casting long shadows across the room, I knew that something had to change. I couldn't live in this shadow any longer. The days following the funerals were a whirlwind of silent houses and unanswered calls. I tried to reach Martin again, but it was as if he had vanished off the face of the earth. That's when the memories began to creep in, unwelcome and unbidden. I remembered our early days, how Martin's charm and ambition had swept me off my feet. We were young, in love, and the world seemed full of possibilities. But as years passed, the man I fell in love with started to fade, replaced by someone consumed by work and his own needs. I was pulled from my reverie by a knock on the door. Standing there was Alex, Martin's younger brother. His eyes were red-rimmed, his usual cheerful demeanor nowhere in sight. "Elaine, I can't believe he didn't show up. Not even a call," he said, his voice heavy with grief and disbelief. "I know, Alex. I've been trying to reach him, but..." Nothing. Alex shook his head, his anger palpable. "You know, Elaine, there's something deeply wrong with him. Mom and Dad deserved better. You deserve better." His words struck a chord in me. Deserve better. The thought had crossed my mind, but hearing it from someone else made it real. It wasn't just me feeling this way. "Elaine, if you need anything, just let me know, okay?" Alex offered before he left, a hint of worry in his eyes. That night, as I lay in bed, the house eerily quiet, I realized how much of my life I had dedicated to a man who saw me as nothing more than a convenience. The love, the support, the sacrifices, it was as if they meant nothing to him. A mixture of anger and resolve began to build within me. I wasn't going to be the silent, suffering wife anymore. I needed to find out what Martin was up to, what was so important that he couldn't even show up for his own parents' funeral. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I hired a private investigator. It was a drastic step, but I needed to know the truth. The PI was a middle-aged woman named Sarah, who had a no-nonsense air about her. "We'll find out what he's up to," Sarah assured me. "It won't take long." True to her word, within a week, Sarah came back with information that shattered any illusions I had left about Martin. Photos and reports of him with another woman in Barcelona, looking carefree and in love. As I looked at the photos, a cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't just a business trip. This was a betrayal of everything our marriage was supposed to stand for. I confronted Martin over the phone. His response was a cocktail of excuses and deflections. "Elaine, you're blowing this out of proportion. It's just a work thing." "A work thing? Is that what you call this?" I countered, my voice shaking with anger. "You wouldn't understand. It's complicated," he snapped back. his voice cold and distant. I realized then that I was speaking to a stranger. The man I had married, the man I had built a life with, was gone. In his place was someone who saw me as nothing more than a hurdle to his desires. That night, as I lay awake, the weight of my decision heavy on my chest, I knew there was no going back. Martin had made his choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. I would no longer be a prisoner in my own life. The days after discovering Martin's betrayal were a blur of anger and disillusionment. Each morning, I awoke to the stark reality of my solitary struggle. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now echoed with the silence of betrayal. I busied myself with the mundane tasks of daily life, but my mind was elsewhere, consumed with thoughts of Martin's deceit. The images from the investigator's report haunted me, a constant reminder of his infidelity. One evening, as I was going through old photo albums, a picture of our wedding day caught my eye. We looked so happy, so in love. I couldn't help but wonder where it had all gone wrong. Was it gradual, or had there been a specific moment when Martin decided I was no longer enough for him? My train of thought was interrupted by a call from Peter, our son. "Hey, Mom, how are you holding up?" "I'm managing, Peter," I replied, trying to sound stronger than I felt. There was a pause before he spoke again, his voice laced with concern. "Mom, I've been thinking. Maybe I should come home for a while, help you through this." His offer touched me deeply, but I couldn't let him put his life on hold for me. "No, Peter, you need to focus on your studies. I'll be fine." But Peter was insistent. "Mom, this isn't just about you. Dad's actions affect me too. I need to be there for you." His determination was a balm to my wounded heart. Despite Martin's absence, Peter had grown into a caring and responsible young man. His support gave me strength, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel so alone. A few days later, Peter arrived. His presence filled the house with a much-needed energy. We spent hours talking, sharing our thoughts and feelings about Martin and the situation at hand. "It's just so selfish, Mom. How could Dad do this to us?" Peter's anger mirrored my own. "I don't know, Peter, but I do know that we can't let his actions destroy us. We're stronger than that." As we talked, a plan began to form in my mind. Martin had taken so much from us, it was time he understood the consequences of his actions. I wasn't going to be the silent victim anymore. It was time for Martin to face the music. The following week, I met with a lawyer to discuss the possibility of divorce. The lawyer, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Hammond, listened intently as I recounted the events of the past few weeks. "Mrs. Harper, based on what you've told me, you have a strong case for divorce, especially with the evidence of infidelity," she said, her tone professional yet empathetic. I nodded, a mix of relief and apprehension washing over me. This was really happening. I was taking the first step towards freeing myself from Martin's shadow. As I left Mrs. Hammond's office, a newfound sense of purpose filled me. I was no longer the woman who waited silently for her husband to return. I was Elaine Harper, and I was going to take control of my life. But as I stood there looking out at the bustling city streets, a part of me couldn't help but mourn the loss of the life I thought I had. The happy family, the loving husband, it was all an illusion, shattered by the harsh light of reality. As I headed home, I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Martin had underestimated me for the last time. The revelation of Martin's affair had set a fire within me, one that burned with the need for justice and retribution. As I sat in our living room, the walls seemed to close in on me, each family portrait a reminder of the facade our life had become. My resolve was tested one evening when Martin called. His voice, once familiar and comforting, now grated on my nerves. "Elaine, I've been thinking. Maybe I was too harsh. We should talk when I get back." His words, meant to soothe, only fueled my anger. "Talk? After everything you've done? You abandoned your family, Martin." "Elaine, you're overreacting. It's not like I planned this. Things just happened," he replied, his tone dismissive, as if his betrayal was a mere inconvenience. "Things just happened? You make it sound like you had no choice in the matter. You chose to be with another woman. You chose to ignore your own parents' funeral." There was silence on the other end, and for a moment, I thought he had hung up. Then he spoke, his voice cold. I don't have time for this, Elaine. I have important work here. That was the last straw. Important work? Is that what you call abandoning your family? You know what, Martin? Maybe it's time I made some important decisions of my own. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. It was time for action. The next day, I met with Sarah, the private investigator. We need more evidence, anything that can help in the divorce proceedings, I told her, my voice firm. Sarah nodded, understanding the assignment. I'll see what I can dig up. Martin won't know what hit him. Over the next few weeks, Sarah provided me with a steady stream of evidence. Photos, emails, and even testimonies from people who had seen Martin with his mistress. It was more than enough to paint a clear picture of his infidelity. Armed with this information, I met with Mrs. Hammond again. She reviewed the evidence, her expression grim. This will certainly help your case, Mrs. Harper. It seems Mr. Harper has been quite careless. As we discussed the next steps, a plan began to take shape. Martin had always been proud of his reputation, both personally and professionally. It was time to use that against him. Mrs. Hammond, I want to make sure Martin feels the consequences of his actions, not just legally, but personally and professionally as well. Mrs. Hammond regarded me with a new level of respect. I understand, Mrs. Harper. We'll make sure he gets what he deserves. When Martin finally returned home, it was to a cold and unwelcoming house. I greeted him with divorce papers, my expression as hard as the resolve within me. Elaine, what is this? He asked, his voice a mix of surprise and annoyance. It's over, Martin. I'm filing for divorce, and before you try to talk your way out of this, know that I have enough evidence to ruin you. Martin's face turned a shade paler, his usual confident demeanor crumbling. You wouldn't dare, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I dare, Martin. I dare to stand up for myself and for our son. You've made your choices, and now you'll live with the consequences. As he read through the papers, his face twisted in anger and disbelief. But there was no going back. I had drawn the line, and there was no crossing it. That night, as Martin packed his bags and left, I felt a sense of liberation. The chains of our loveless marriage were finally broken. I was free, free to start anew, free from the lies and deceit that had bound me for so long. As I watched him drive away, a sense of justice filled me. This was just the beginning. Martin would soon learn that his actions had consequences, consequences that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The days following Martin's departure were filled with a tumultuous mix of emotions. Anger, relief, and a sense of vindication swirled within me. The house, now void of his presence, felt larger, as if it too had been holding its breath under his oppressive shadow. My resolve was tested when I received a call from Martin, his tone a mix of anger and desperation. Elaine, you're ruining me. The divorce papers, the allegations. Do you realize what you're doing? His words were like fuel to my fire. Yes, Martin, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm showing the world who you really are. You can't do this to me. I've worked hard for everything I have, he argued, his voice laced with entitlement. Worked hard? You mean you've lied and cheated your way through our marriage? You've made your bed, Martin. Now you have to lie in it. Martin's voice rose, a crescendo of frustration and disbelief. You were nothing before me. You think you can just take everything? I felt a surge of power at his words. I was nothing? No, Martin. I was everything you didn't appreciate. And now I'm taking back what's mine. The call ended with Martin's threats echoing in my ears, but they no longer held any power over me. I was done being the victim. As the divorce proceedings began, Martin's true nature became evident for all to see. His attempts to hide assets and slander me only served to damage his reputation further. The evidence Sarah had gathered painted a clear picture of his deceit and infidelity. The court hearings were tense, with Martin's lawyers trying every trick in the book. But Mrs. Hammond was a force to be reckoned with, countering their moves with precision and finesse. Throughout it all, Peter stood by my side, his support unwavering. He had grown disillusioned with his father, the truth eroding any semblance of respect he once held. The day the divorce was finalized was a day of liberation. As the judge declared our marriage dissolved, a weight lifted from my shoulders. I had won, not just the divorce, but my freedom from Martin's shadow. After the court session, Martin approached me, a shell of the man he once was. Elaine, please, we can still fix this. I looked at him, really looked at him, and what I saw was a man broken by his own arrogance. "There's nothing left to fix, Martin. You broke everything worth saving." Walking away from him, I felt a chapter of my life closing. The pain, the betrayal, the lies, they were all behind me now. Ahead lay a path of my own making, free from the deceit that had clouded my life for so long. As I stepped out of the courthouse, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the world in a warm golden light. It felt like a sign, a promise of new beginnings and brighter days ahead. I turned to Peter, a smile spreading across my face. "Let's go home, son. We have a new life to start." And with that, we walked away, leaving Martin and the past where they belonged, behind us. With the divorce finalized, I was determined to reveal the extent of Martin's disgrace to those who had been blinded by his facade. I knew that true justice wouldn't come from the courts alone. It had to come from exposing him to the world. I started by reaching out to our mutual friends, people who had known us as a couple for years. The initial reactions were mixed, with some refusing to believe the truth, but I had evidence, undeniable proof of his infidelity and deceit. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. One evening, I invited a few friends over, people who had doubted me initially. As they sat in my living room, I showed them the messages and pictures Sarah had gathered. Shock and disbelief filled the room as they saw Martin's true colors laid bare. One friend, Lisa, shook her head in disbelief. "I can't believe I defended him all this time. He's a monster." Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded. "He fooled us all, but now you know." Lisa was the first to take action. She contacted others in our social circle, sharing the evidence and urging them to reconsider their alliances. Soon, the once seemingly impenetrable wall of support around Martin began to crumble. One by one, our friends distanced themselves from him, appalled by his actions. The same people who had once admired him now saw him for what he was, a selfish, deceitful man who had no regard for anyone but himself. As Martin's social standing crumbled, he became increasingly isolated. His attempts to salvage his reputation only made things worse, as he lashed out at those who had abandoned him. His once strong network of contacts began to disappear, leaving him with no one to turn to. I watched with a sense of grim satisfaction as the man who had caused me so much pain faced the consequences of his actions. It wasn't enough for him to lose his friends. I wanted him to lose everything. One day, I received a call from Martin's former boss, Mr. Reynolds. He had heard about the divorce and the scandal surrounding Martin. "Elaine, I had no idea. I can't believe he would do such things." I sighed, my voice heavy with exhaustion. "It's been a long time coming, Mr. Reynolds. Martin's true nature finally caught up with him." Mr. Reynolds paused, then spoke with a hint of regret. "I'm sorry to hear about all of this, but I wanted to let you know that Martin's behavior at the company has also come to light. We've decided to terminate his employment." I felt a rush of vindication. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. It's about time he faced the consequences." As the news of Martin's termination spread, his world crumbled further. He had lost his job, his friends, and his reputation. It was a fall from grace that he couldn't recover from. But I wasn't done yet. I had one final move to make, one that would ensure Martin paid for his actions in the most significant way possible. With Martin's world in shambles, it was time for the final blow, the ultimate revenge that would ensure he paid for his sins. I had discovered a hidden secret during the divorce proceedings, one that would bring him to his knees. Late one evening, as I sat in my quiet home, I made the call I had been dreading but also eagerly anticipating. The voice on the other end was familiar, cold, and detached. "Martin, we need to talk." There was a long pause before he replied, his voice wary. "What do you want, Elaine?" "I want justice, Martin. I want you to pay for everything you've done." My words were deliberate, each one carrying the weight of my anger and determination. Martin chuckled, a mocking sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You think you can do anything to me now? I've lost it all, Elaine. What more could you possibly take from me?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I know about your hidden accounts, Martin, the offshore ones you thought were safe. I have the evidence, and I'm not afraid to expose you." Silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I could hear the panic in his voice when he finally responded. "How did you?" "That's not important right now," I interrupted. "What matters is that I have the power to ruin you completely. The authorities will be very interested in those accounts, Martin. His voice trembled as he spoke, desperation creeping in. What do you want, Elaine? Money? Is that what this is about? I couldn't help but laugh. A bitter and vindictive sound. Money won't fix the damage you've done, Martin, but it will ensure you suffer for a long time. I outlined my terms, a substantial portion of his hidden wealth to be transferred to me as compensation for the years of pain and betrayal. Martin had no choice but to agree, his voice defeated. As I hung up the phone, I felt a rush of satisfaction. Martin had lost everything, his job, his reputation, and now his secret wealth. He was a broken man, a shadow of his former self. But I had won. I had taken back control of my life, exposed him for the monster he was, and ensured that he would pay for his actions. It was a sweet victory, one that had been a long time coming. In the end, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my own dignity and self-worth. I had emerged from the darkness stronger and more resilient than ever. As I sat alone in my quiet home, I couldn't help but smile. The nightmare was finally over, and I was free to live my life on my terms. Martin's downfall was a satisfying end to a chapter of my life that I was more than ready to leave behind.